Hello everybody, my name is Kara, and today I'm going to be talking about some 3-star books that I'm really glad I read. I guess I need to explain the title of this video a little bit. So in general, 3 stars for me is not a fantastic rating. Like, unless something is at least 3.5 stars, often even above that, I wouldn't say it's something I recommend to people. At least not off the bat, you know? But these are going to be some books that, even though they're 3 stars, which is kind of a middle of the road, like I didn't hate it, but if I could go back in time and use this time to read another new book, then I would, instead of reading this one. Like, these are going to be some books that, despite being in that range that is usually kind of meh for me, I'm actually really glad I read them. And another reason that I can kind of tell these are ones that stuck with me is the fact that all of these 3-star books I haven't unhauled. And in general, 3 stars get unhauled pretty quick for me. So the first one I have to talk about is My True Love Gave to Me, edited by Stephanie Perkins. And these are 12 holiday stories by a bunch of different authors. And I read this a couple years ago. This is actually a new copy that I bought because I originally read it from the library. And I really, I had kind of mixed feelings about a lot of these stories. I don't get along too well with short story collections in general, but this one was all over BookTube. People were raving about it, and I thought maybe this was the one that would convince me. And I gave it 3 stars, clearly. So there were a couple that I really enjoyed, but there were quite a few of these stories that I just forgot or just didn't make an impression on me that I knew I would never want to read again. But the reason I actually ended up buying a copy of this recently, and the reason that it's in this video, is there were a few stories that really stuck out in my mind. And one of them that I remembered and that I still think about a lot is the one from Jenny Han. Like, this was before I had read any of Jenny Han's books. I had heard people talking about them, but the premises just didn't interest me. And then I read that short story and I could not get it out of my head. There was just something about the way she wrote and the unexpectedness of where that story went, and really feeling for the main character when the story was only a few pages long. There was something about that that I remembered, and I ended up picking up one of Jenny Han's books, and now I would consider her one of my favorite contemporary authors for sure. And that's just really amazing to me because that is something that's directly connected to me reading this book. I don't know when I would have been exposed to her writing if I hadn't picked this up. So I'm actually really looking forward to reading that story again, and a few of the others. Maybe I'll do a full reread and see if there are any that really impress me the second time around. But I'm so grateful that this book helped me find one of my favorite authors. So the next book I'm going to talk about is actually the reason I am doing this video now, even though I've had this idea kind of for a while, and that is Beastkeeper by Kat Hellison. This I talked about in my latest wrap-up. I will link that down below in case you missed it, but this was for the BookTube Rereadathon, and it was the challenge for that month was to reread a book that confused you or that you had mixed feelings about. And again, I had given this one 3 stars, and it's a gender-flipped Beauty and the Beast kind of retelling or inspired story, and it's middle grade. And when I read it the first time, I think I was in just a weird headspace to read it. I wasn't in the mood for this kind of dark and twisty and strange, and it went in some unexpected directions that, rather than pleasantly surprising me, I was just wait, this isn't what I signed up for. So I gave it 3 stars, and I actually almost unhauled this book multiple times because of what I said earlier about 3 stars usually not making the cut. Something always stopped me from getting rid of it. And then I finally picked it up for the rereadathon, and I'm like, this is it. I'm gonna decide how I feel about this book, and if it doesn't get any better, I'm gonna get rid of it. And I loved this. I give it 5 stars the second time I read it, although it still counts for this video because of my first impression. But this is one of my new favorite Beauty and the Beast stories, I think, and that is a fairy tale that I really enjoy and that I read a lot of retellings for. And this was just such a beautiful and magical and unusual kind of book, and this is, I think, a great example of how the mood you're in or the expectations you have for a book can really affect your feelings on it overall. It can take something that could be a new favorite for you, but if you're not in the mood to read it, you might not enjoy it very much. So I think that was pretty amazing turnaround for a book, and I'm so glad that I read this and that I didn't unhaul it, and I highly recommend this one. Next is Wanted by Betsy Hsiao. This is actually the second book in a trilogy. I have the 3rd book still to read, and I almost DNF'd this one. I was at the halfway point, and I think partly it had been so long since I read the first book that I was starting to forget things, but also just it was written in a really confusing way, and part of that was deliberate, I think, but it was still just really frustrating because I couldn't remember who any of these characters were, like I didn't know what the point of the story was, and I got so close to DNFing this. Like, I'm not someone who quits books easily. I had told myself, like, if it doesn't get better in the next, like, few chapters, then I'm quitting. But it did start getting better. And actually, this book has one of the best and most surprising endings I have ever read. And it's pretty rare for me to read a book that just completely takes me by surprise with some kind of plot or, you know, ending or any kind of plot twist. It's really, really unusual for me to not have any inkling of it. And I've just like always been really good at predicting those, even when I was younger, so it's just, I don't get surprised a lot. And the fact that this one did, and it did it in such a cool and interesting way, it makes me really glad that I read this, and actually makes me really excited for the third book when I thought this was a series I was going to quit. And finally, the last book I'm going to talk about today is The Kingdom of Little Wounds by Suzanne Kokel. I think I mentioned this once in a tag video. This book it's a historical fiction, but I think it's also a little bit of fantasy elements in it, and it's set in a Scandinavian country or city, and there are like there's all this like royal intrigue, and we follow 3 female characters primarily, and how their lives are just turned upside down by the way that women are treated in this society. Like, they all have their struggles with sexism and with racism. And this book is just so brutal and upsetting, and it's very realistic about the way that women in this time period lived. Even though this is kind of a fantasy analog, it's clearly based on our world, which means that women are treated like shit. And especially based on like your class and your race. One of the main characters is actually a slave, or a former slave, and this book is just, it's so upsetting, and there were parts that were just really disgusting. Definitely a trigger warning for rape and sexual assault, and I don't remember if there was, I think there was also physical abuse in this book. It's really upsetting, and this is another one that I almost quit multiple times, and then I finally decided to push myself through it because I wanted to see if it got better, because at this point, like, I did care about these 3 main characters, like, I wanted them to be happy, and it's a kind of book where I'm really glad I finished it, and like I'm glad that I, you know, didn't quit, but I'm not sure if I'm glad I read it yet. I'm still trying to figure this out, and I read this book like a couple years ago, I think. So definitely not, this is not a recommendation for this one. If it sounds interesting to you, it's very well written, and as I said, it's like unflinchingly realistic, but I don't know. I don't really know what else to say about it, except that this was 3 stars, but I think about it a lot, and I think I am glad that I read it, which is why it's in this video. So those are all the books I'm going to talk about today. Just some books that you might look at my rating and think they were mediocre, but for one reason or another, I'm actually really glad that I read them. I'd be really interested to hear in the comments if you guys have read any books like that. I just think it's a really interesting thing to see and to compare, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I will see you soon with another one, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!